Welcome to Out of the Box with Kermit Morris, a podcast dedicated to helping believers grow in their spiritual walk. Jesus wants us to look more and more like Him every day by getting out of our comfort zones. We hope this podcast will be a blessing to you as you learn to get out of your box and follow Christ. Now, here's our host, Kermit Morris.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this edition of Out of the Box with Kermit Morris. I'm Kermit Morris, your host, and I am excited about today. There are so many things that we need to share with you, and this may end up being more than just one session. But we are excited about being here today, and I have a very special guest, Susan Oldham. Is that how you say your last name?
That's right. I usually say Oldham because people can spell it better that way, but it is Oldham, and I appreciate that.
She is an accomplished elder with the First Presbyterian Church here in town.
That's right.
Teaches a Bible study, and I hear through the grapevine that she is very, very good.
Well,
my wife says the best she's ever heard.
Well, you're very, very kind. Henrietta's a big part of our Bible study, and there's a big group of us that have been meeting for 10 years, and we just love each other. We love each other, so I appreciate your kind words.
Well, Susan, some of the people may not be very familiar with you as
Okay.
they are with me,
Okay.
but tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh my goodness. Personally, I have 3 adult children. I have 5 precious grandchildren. And my husband and I have been living in Spartanburg for 19 years now, though we both were born and raised in South Carolina, but we moved a lot. In fact, I was telling somebody the other day that in my childhood years, moving a lot with my family and then moving with Bill, I've lived in 30 houses. So I am presently going through the attic. Finally, to purge a little bit. But, Kermit, I've had a great life. I've had a lot of interesting jobs. It's not always been easy, but most of my life was in corporate work until God called me at 60 to take some seminary classes. Quite honestly, I was afraid. I'd been teaching Bible studies. I was afraid that people were going to find me out. So I took some classes, and I'd always been in love with the Bible, but it just put me on a path of being what in the Presbyterian Church we called commissioned ruling elder, which is like a lay pastor. Mm-hmm. So I serve a lot of small churches that are without pastors right now.
I don't think I told you this, but when I was serving as an intentional interim down in Union County, at First Baptist Church Union, the person that played the organ in our church was a member of a little Presbyterian church out in the country from Union.
Oh, really?
And we got to talking, and she found out that I'd served a Presbyterian church in Connecticut.
Okay.
And so this little church is exactly what you're talking about. They couldn't afford a pastor.
Right.
And so they would have the service at 8:30 on Sunday morning, and they asked me to come out and preach for them before I'd go preach at First Baptist.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So
and
it was a good
we
experience.
still have pastors that do that. It's called a yoked ministry. They teach it. They'll preach at one church and then go to another one, and it's a beautiful thing. So,
What was there ever a turning point spiritually in your life that you ran into and you said, God's doing something here?
There's one specific time when we were growing up. I grew up in South Carolina, smaller town, Greenwood, and we were talking about this earlier. We just sort of, as teenagers, we went to whoever had the biggest fellowship or hayride or skating party or whatever was going on. So I felt like I was part of the Baptist church and the Lutheran church and certainly the Presbyterian church, and but my home church was Methodist. And I had some friends that were very involved in the South Main Street Baptist Youth Choir, and they put on Jesus Christ Superstar.
Wow.
And I remember it so vividly. I was sitting in the pew, in the very first pew in the balcony, and so clearly heard God's call on my life. I was 17. And what I think that represented for me, there was some conflict in my family at that time. And what I heard God say to me is, I am your father.
Wow.
You are mine. I would love to say that I completely committed my life, and I went to church every Sunday after that and was involved in multiple Bible studies. But the truth is, I went off to college. I was committed to my faith, but I really wasn't connected to a church during those 4 years. But I was so protected by the friends that God put in my life that allowed my faith to grow some then. And then along the way, there's been like other very poignant times where I felt God has continued to call me, especially in times of brokenness, quite honestly.
God uses brokenness. He uses pain in our lives. He uses a lot of things in our lives. I'm not saying that God causes that to happen, but when it happens, He intervenes because He gets our attention and causes us to grow a little bit more. Has that kind of thing happened in your life?
Oh, my goodness, yes. You know, I'm reading a book now. It's called Falling Upward. It's an older book by Franciscan priest Richard Rohr. It's fantastic, and I love his writings. But he talks about that. He talks about these two halves of our life, kind of the first half of our life when we're building our container of our lives and we're getting that first job and we're launching into our career and we're building our family, maybe buying our first home, and all that's good. But then at some point, inevitably, a suffering occurs. And it's in that valley of despair, I think, where God meets us and starts to build that second half of our life. And so often we think, you know, midlife is a chronological age. But quite honestly, with some of the pain that I experienced earlier, I think my second half came a little earlier than even when I was married. I had some maybe maturity. Which doesn't mean that I always acted real mature, but maybe some maturity that came, and I do think that Romans 8:28, you know, doesn't say that all things are good, but all things work for good. I look back, and it's not fun when you're going through it, but I look back at those dark times and go, okay, there really was growth. There really was growth.
Yeah,
So.
And it's not fun when you go through it.
No.
But God always takes us through it. He doesn't leave us in the middle of the pain.
Right.
He takes us through to the other side. And that's when we see some of the growth taking place in our lives as He delivers on His plan for our life and gets us where He wants us to be. I'm sure you're familiar with, that I am too, that our main denominations in America are losing members.
Yes.
People are leaving the church, and for different reasons, for different things. But one of the things that I found as I go around to different churches is there's a lack of spiritual growth for members.
Yes.
And do you think that's part of the reason we're losing members in mainland denominations?
You know,
mainline?
You know, Kermit, that's a really, really, I think, important observation that you make, because there's just been so much written, so much studied. There's a great author, writer, speaker there out there now his name's Andy Root, and he looks at this a lot from terms of the secular age and where church has gone since the Reformation. One of the things that I think is, and I think it ties in with what you're talking about, spiritual growth, is that for me, growth for other individuals comes through vulnerability and our ability to see and to be able to relate as humans and to be connected, because God is a connectional God. And our culture is more, with social media, is one more of openness, maybe vulnerability. People can tell their stories. Now, they can also post only the good stuff on social media, which is not really seeing the heart. But we've grown up with so much information at us, and then sometimes people go to church and they don't feel that it's okay to show that real side of themselves, you know, when that's exactly what church should be, right? A hospital for the hurting.
Yeah.
And not just physical hurting, but,
Yeah.
the healing part. So I think it's churches learning and certainly not being like the culture, but understanding that it's so important to create a safe place where people can be real and be authentic, so they do have that spiritual growth in their lives.
Do you think that's because we sometimes feel like if I'm open up to these people, they'll get to know me like I know me.
Oh, yeah.
And if they know me like I know me, then they won't like me like I don't like me. And so we're hesitant to open ourselves up to others. How can we stop that in the church and make ourselves more vulnerable so that we can grow from that?
Well, I think probably it starts with leadership, with church leadership. I think it also comes with just a climate, a feel that when you walk in a church and you feel embraced. One of the things that I'm always interested in is what makes for a welcoming church. And there's this book, I can't remember the name of it, but the author talked about holy huddles. Isn't that interesting? Where people would walk in church and there would be a huddle of friends talking about what they had done the night before, what was coming up in the week ahead, but immediately you feel like you're somehow not part of the family. So I think the more the welcoming churches, and I'm very, very blessed that I'm a member of a church that I think is extremely welcoming, the more that we can embrace people, because folks aren't going to really just walk through the door and tell us their story right off, especially if it's a story of pain, which most of us have at some point in our lives. But to build that trust, to build that safe space. And I think some of that comes with us sharing our own hearts, that gives permission for someone else to see, oh, wow, here's where we connect. Because even though the pain might not be exactly the same, the situation might not be, it's okay that I've made mistakes, that I've made blunders, that my family has some dysfunction. It's okay. So
That's one of the reasons that I'm a big proponent of small groups.
Oh, yeah.
Especially small groups in the home. Because you get away from the church setting, you're in a comfortable
Right.
place, and you feel more open sometimes to share those things that are
Right.
really bothering you because you get comfortable with the people there.
Right.
Why don't we do more of those things in churches?
Well, I'm seeing it, I think especially in a large church, it's absolutely where we can find a place of belonging. One of the things that I think God's put on my heart is some of the greatest church work that I've experienced has been in the parking lot, not in the sanctuary. Because I think those places where we connect and God will put an opportunity for a conversation. And it could be in the parking lot after we leave a meaningful sermon and somebody has something to share with somebody else and they never really thought that conversation would come up, and then it does. And it creates unity. So I think you're exactly right that it's got to be, and human nature just tells us that we need that connection on a more intimate level. One of the things that we're doing at our church is we have what's called Acts 2 dinners. And we will just people sign up, and then they're randomly assigned to people's homes, and they show up maybe 12 or 14. There's nothing better than fellowship over good food around a table, and conversation that just evolves from that is great, and a way to get to know somebody differently.
Yeah. When we do a small group, we always do a meal together.
Yeah.
Because once we share a meal and we'll open up more about our lives and what God is doing in our lives, or the lack of what God's doing in our lives that we think sometimes. But we need that intimacy and sharing with one another if we're going to be authentic Christians.
Right.
Because we can't hold back who we are if we're not willing enough to trust and to share in those things. I think I've got 2 or 3 words in the Bible that I think are probably the most important words in the Bible. And the first is love.
Yeah.
God said, love the Lord your God with all your heart and love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, and all your strength. And the second is like it, to love your neighbor as yourself. And we don't concentrate enough on loving God, loving ourselves, and loving others that we should. And so I think love is important. The second, I think, is trust. Do we really trust God? Can we trust Him? He wants us to trust Him more than anything, to place our lives in His. We in Baptist work, we talk about all the time of giving your life to Christ.
Right.
But we don't really give it to Him. We say, here, I'm going to join the church, but this part I got to keep back.
Right.
I got to hold on to. I can't let it go. And so we don't give Him our lives. Is there a time in your life where you said, okay, God, here's my life. Now you take it.
You take it. Oh my goodness, yeah. I mean, I think about what you just said about a lack of trust, and I think, trust in any relationship is built on a foundation that says that people or God are going to come through with what they've told us they will do. So it's always helpful to me to look back over God's faithfulness throughout all of time, because we like to know that it's going to happen right away, but to look at His plan as it has evolved. And I think the answer to your question, I think most of us, we're afraid, because it all comes from fear, we're afraid of letting go of control and letting somebody else, as Carrie Underwood sings, Jesus take the wheel, because we kind of want to take a shortcut, and Jesus wants to take the long route sometimes, when He's driving. But for me, when I've been in situations that I realize I absolutely have no control, and it is God's plan and not mine, those situations to me are what builds my faith more than anything, because He does come through. I did some chaplaincy work for about a year as part of my training, and there are no words that you have for families that are taking a 17-year-old off life support in the middle of the night.
Yes.
But somehow walking the halls to that room, praying, God be with me, He is. And for me personally, I'm a fixer, right? I want to have the right answers. I want to have the solutions, and I don't. But God does.
That's right.
And so I think that is what we're most afraid of as humans, is that fear of really letting go. We could argue or talk all day about, is it ego? Is it we somehow think we can do it better than God? But I think it's fear, And so the more our faith grows by trusting and seeing that He really does walk alongside us and others, then trust grows.
That's right.
And the easier it is to let go of that grip a little bit.
Yeah. And you've got to experience Him doing that to really understand it.
Right.
To put it all on the line, go all in and say, this is what I'm doing. And God, I trust you as you walk down that hallway where that room is to take that child off of life support. God, give me the words, give me the answers. Right. And God comes through.
He does come through. And I think the other thing too, for me, is looking to the other saints, that have been in my life here, earthly, and then those that have gone on to heaven, and to see the models of their life where they have been so faithful and they have trusted. And you stand back and you say, this person has something I want. They have something I want, because they're living in unimaginable pain, the suffering, but yet they've got something. That for me is spiritually formation for me. Allows me to get stronger.
Yeah. The thing is that as we experience Him working in our life, we can't go back
No.
because it's so thrilling to do what you feel like God is doing through you. That wasn't planned. You didn't know it was going
Right.
to come out like that. And to see God working and using you for something. We talked earlier a little bit about that I believe that God has a plan for every person that's born on this life. Of course, if we never know God, we never know His
Right.
plan. And I don't think that you can really be happy in this life without knowing His plan.
Oh, that's a good one. That's really
You've
good.
got to know what He wants, why He designed you, why He put you the way you were. When we're born into this life, we're born with certain abilities in our life.
Mm-hmm.
Now, those develop as we go along. It may be, if your name's Michael Jordan, you can dribble a basketball
Yeah.
and shoot it. But a lot of us don't have those kind of abilities. But He does give us all abilities. And I believe that those abilities that we're born with are the things that, when they're used, put us right in the middle of what His plan is for our life. So we have those abilities, those natural abilities. We have experiences along the way that He gives us and
Right.
puts us in to learn from Him, to grow in Him. And then when we're born again, when we come to know Him as our Savior, He gives us spiritual gifts.
Yes.
And those spiritual gifts combined with the natural abilities are also fall into place in that plan.
Right.
And when we develop that plan, then we're the happiest we're going to be because we're doing what we're made for.
That's right. And what we are made for. You know, when Paul talks about run the race, he's talking about running your race, right? Because
Right.
I think, especially today with social media, there's suddenly, you know, flashes out there that picture people with the perfect life. And we think our plan or our race has got to be that race. Right? Instead of stepping back and going, that's not how God gifted me, but He gifted me this other way. When you're talking about being in Christ, I always love, because it kind of was my story, is, you know, sometimes we see it biblically too, and we meet people where I always like, for me, I like the metaphor of thinking about a blind on a window, much like what you've got here. And for some people, that blind just opens right away and the light comes through and they see it and there's a transformation. You can see it in their lives and their countenance. But for me, it's been more of a gradually opening of the light coming through. Mm-hmm. And then sometimes the blinds close. And there are periods of doubt, despair, uncertainty. You know, some people wrestle with God. How in the world could you have let this happen? You know, I prayed. This is not what I prayed for. And I think that in those times, God is a big God. I don't think we can look back and shame ourselves into thinking our faith wasn't as strong because we doubted. You know, God can work with that.
Bet you.
In fact, I think that's where He works best, to be honest. But it took me a long time to learn that.
Yeah.
Because I used to think in those times when the blinds were closed a little bit and I was going through really hard period in my life, I looked at that as I must not have the faith. Faith was there because God says even if it's a mustard seed, I can work with that, right?
That's right.
Because faith is what? It's a gift from Him. It's not anything that we do. It's His gift to us. So I love that idea. I love what you're saying.
Somebody told me one time that faith is, if you were defining it, faith is coming to the edge of total darkness
Oh, yeah.
and taking one more step.
Wow.
That's that trust factor.
Yeah.
Do I trust Him enough to take that step?
Right.
And then the other word that I would use
Okay.
from the Bible is obedient.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Jesus said, if you love me, you'll obey me.
Right.
And we don't like to obey anybody.
No.
But
Just ask my husband about that about me. Yeah.
no, I think I'll stay out of that one. But we want, when my youngest daughter, was raising her 3 boys,
Yeah.
she would, they'd do something that she'd tell them to do, or she'd tell them to do something, they didn't do it. She'd go up and put her hands on her cheeks like that and say, first time obedience. First time obedience. And that's what God wants from us.
Right.
When he gives us a command, when he tells us to do, and his word is full of those commands,
Yeah.
he's saying first time obedience. Well, I know I'm supposed to go witness to this guy, God, but not now. First time obedience.
Yeah.
When I tell you to do it, go do it. And start watching for that person to come into your life, because they're going to come into your life, and are you going to pass it up, or are you going to do it?
That's right, because the blessing's always ours. So often those commandments of obedience, people look at that and go, well, that's pretty punitive,
Yeah,
right? It's pretty punitive, and it's all for our own good.
exactly.
It's all for our own good. There's this story of a public school in New York that sat right in the middle of the city. And what they noticed is on the playground, all the kids were just fighting, and they were after each other, and there was just a lot of hustling, and they were, having to go to timeout. And then they came in and they put a large, and this was on 2 really busy streets, so they put a fence all around. And when they put that fence, the kids scattered more, but they felt safe. And so I always think about that in terms of God putting those boundaries in our life, because it allows us to feel inner peace and free, right? Freedom more. It's all for us. It's that person that, like you said, oh my goodness, they're going to call. I'm looking at my phone. I don't have time. Okay, God, I got time. The blessing's always mine.
That's right.
It's always mine. And to the other person, I think, too. But that just showing up when God says, look, all I'm doing is asking you to show up,
Yeah. Susan, what we don't understand, I think a lot of times, is that blessings always follow obedience.
Oh, okay.
When we obey,
Yeah.
blessings are going to come.
Exactly.
And so blessings always follow obedience.
Right.
And we just need to be more obedient to what
Right.
God tells us to do.
Right.
And we don't, because we don't trust him.
Yeah. It's all a circle, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
It
we
is.
we want our own way.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so it's important that we grow as a Christian. And those of you listening today, you know that. You know you need to grow. And you need to open up and let God and trust him and then obey him.
And I think the biggest thing too is we tend to, especially those of us, which is most of us, is we're achievers, right? Because that's what the world has told us that success is built on, is achievement. And so we look at following God as work. That there's so much we have to do instead of just being with him. To me, I think about it in terms of being a parent and a grandparent, of how much it means to me when my kids, I see a text come through, or they take the time to call me, especially if they ask advice. Because, one time, Kermit, I heard getting old is having some answers, but nobody's asking you the questions.
Exactly.
But I think about how much it must please God. When we do, we really don't know. We're at the end of our rope, or any time, just to stop during the day and give him your time and your presence, is just so beautiful. And I fail sometimes, because I get caught up in the busyness of life instead of really just savoring those moments with him.
So you get caught up in the busyness of life, and you're really not living life.
No, not like he intended us to live.
Exactly.
Abundant.
Exactly.
He gives us life abundant. Yeah.
If you were had the opportunity, and somebody came to you and said, Susan, we're going to start a new church in this town, how would you design that church?
Oh, really good coffee. Really good coffee.
Great coffee.
Great coffee with good creamers. There's one I love by International Delight, Southern Pecan, Southern Butter Pecan. I say that laughingly, but in reality, when you think about holding a cup of coffee, it's warm, it's a conversation piece, and it goes back to the food, the fellowship. But I think to build a church, back in Jesus's day, there were no bricks and mortars, right?
No.
They met in people's homes. So I think more than anything, it's the fellowship, it's the embrace, it's the welcome, it's that feeling of authenticity, that you can be who you are. There's not a dress code.
That's right.
You come as you are. I think music's an important part of how we worship. So I think music, and I think that probably what all people are really yearning for is we tend to have splintered that intergenerational community a little bit. We used to live with families, and folks had that benefit of having lots of different aged individuals, either family members or neighbors. And so I think a lot of people are attracted to church because if their own children's grandparents don't live in town, there's older individuals at church that can be their grandparents. Same thing with, there's nothing more exciting, I think, than people of our age, right, to go to church and see young families. Yeah. So I think the intergenerational piece is so important.
It is. It's been a great time talking with you
today. I've loved
it.
Thank you for having me.
And we're going to do it again.
Okay, it'd be great. It would be fantastic.
Awesome.
All righty.
Thank you for listening today. Hopefully you've heard something today that's challenged you a little bit, that said to you, there's more I need to do. If you did, and you enjoyed having Susan with us today, would you send me an email at outoftheboxkermit@gmail.com. Tell us about it, and tell us what you would like to hear about and talk about on Out of the Box. The opportunity to grow comes by knowing Christ, sharing with Him, or sharing Him and then sharing with Him, and then also about being obedient to what He says to do. And if He tells you to do something, trust Him.
Yeah.
He's got your best interest on His heart. Now, you may not believe that right now, but nothing can happen to you that's not in God's best interest. Thanks for joining us. Tune in next week for Out of the Box with Kermit Morris. Glad to have you. Have a great day, and remember, as you go about your work day, where you go about going to the store, wherever you go, learn to get out of your box and share Christ. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you next week.